So Dennis Althouse, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm good. I'm good. It's been a very busy day. I'm batching it with my 19-year-old who's going to Santa Cruz coming up in September.
It
But
does.
Dennis, thanks for being here. Dennis Althouse, business and real estate litigation attorney, and I can't say extraordinaire because then David will give me a call and give us a two thumbs down or something like that. So
You get reported, yeah.
yeah.
But permanent record will be marked.
Yes, yes. And you're with Shimley Althouse,
I am.
partner?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I would love. I know that the way people speak about you when we're together, because we network together and stuff, is always like really, really exemplary. Very clear, very easy to deal with. That you really know your stuff, and that's all I hear about it. Is just nothing but great things about you. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you here, so we can just talk. And I wanted to hear some of your stories. But would you mind telling us just a little bit more about what you do in your company? Just give us a snapshot.
Sure. As a snapshot, Shimley Althouse, my partner Paul Shimley and I, we've known each other for 30 plus years. He was at a firm practicing law. He's about 10 years older than me. And he was practicing law prior to when I first came into the practice. And we spent a couple of years together there. And then we were separated by firm breakups and then again together for 12 years. And 8 years ago, we founded this firm, the two of us. And so he handles mainly employment defense issues, but he also does some of the real estate work. I
Mm-hmm.
handle the real estate and construction issues, both litigated and non-litigated matters. Try to stay out of litigation because of the expense.
Yep.
Uh, but also, if that's necessary, then, mediation, arbitration, and trial is where we take it if it needs to go there. So
Excellent.
which kind of
So
gets, go ahead.
no, I was going to say. So what is you brought up? Avoid litigation whenever you can, which I think is always. That's one of the things I like about you so much. It's like, okay, I get paid for litigating, but we try to avoid that as much as possible because it's so expensive and painful and it's torture. So, but let's say you have to go. I mean, what do you? I know it can be a range, but is there? At what point do you say, you know what, now we have to because there's this much at stake or whatnot? What is the determining factor for you?
Well, it's got to be enough money at stake, as you said. I actually watched one of your other videos, and I think the attorney you spoke with is right. I mean, if you take a case to trial, it's going to take you at least 12 to 18 months, and it's going to
Mm-hmm.
cost you in attorney's fees at least $100,000 to $150,000
Mm-hmm.
there. So your dispute needs to exceed that level. It's extremely disruptive to both your personal life and your business life. If you get into litigation because you have to go to depositions, there'll be court
Mm-hmm.
hearings, maybe a mediation, and then just the cost and stress on your business. If you have employees, they'll need to show up for deposition. And so just the cost is very difficult in and of itself, but it's not the only consideration. So when we look at you have to, basically you're against the wall on a statute of limitations. The other party is not responding at all to any kind of efforts to resolve short of a litigation. And, you have to evaluate at that point, my tagline is the juice worth the squeeze. What
That's
are we
right.
going to do? Are we going to take what they're offering? Are we going to walk away? Are we going to file a lawsuit? Sometimes you file a lawsuit and you get a response, and then that's when you get it done. Other
Mm-hmm.
times you have to take it to the mat.
Well, oftentimes it seems that people, when it goes to litigation, is when you have someone on the other side who is litigious and has lots of money, and they know that little guy over here doesn't have as much. So so I would think that oftentimes it's just used as a bully tactic, and they win just because they have money and they're able to do it.
And sometimes you run into those where you just get papered to death and they know they can outlast you in terms of finances. And, you do what you can to mitigate throughout the litigation process. But yeah, I've had instances where I mean, that's the rich, angry, and wrong client, will fight forever. And I've opposed a few of those. And it actually had a case, as you said, during a sale transaction, we had a bunch of non-disclosure issues.
Mm-hmm.
As part of the sale, and the guy was an attorney who sold it. And I told the client I had a construction consultant come in, looked at it. It's about $100,000 worth of repair issues. And I talked to the
Mm-hmm.
client, and we sent a demand letter, and he basically said, screw you, the horse you rode in on, and the dog that followed you, and decided I'd rather spend my $100,000 fixing it than litigating it. And so that's what they did. They made that decision, but they were fully informed of the issues and their options, and I think in that case it was probably the right decision for them.
So usually if it's a non-disclosure issue, it's because clearly the seller, the agent, whoever it might be, knew and didn't disclose it. But what if there's a situation where something comes up and it turns out the hillside's coming down, but the seller really had no knowledge of it? Then what happens?
Well, if the seller truly doesn't know about it, I mean, you're looking for other avenues to see if there was some way they could have, if they got notice from the county, from the hillsides, if they saw the neighbor's hill slide down. But if there's truly no evidence that they didn't know something, then you're kind of out of luck. I mean, you bought the pig in a poke, so to speak. I had a case very close to that recently. We went to arbitration. Client had bought a 5-bedroom house. They disclosed that 2 of the bedrooms were non-permitted. They disclosed a non-permitted garage, but they didn't disclose hillside problems. They didn't disclose that they had permit violations going back into the 70s when they had bought the house out of a foreclosure in the 80s. And so we went after them for non-disclosure on a whole number of issues, but it came down to all the permit violations preceded their ownership. And so we didn't have any evidence to prove that they had actually gotten notice of those problems, because all the repairs they did were not permitted, so they never went to the building department. Fortunately for us, he also, when he sold it as 5-bedroom working bedrooms, he did during the course of the sale say, oh, by the way, I've got a gray water system here for the washing machine, and it goes into the backyard. So we thought that was interesting, and we looked into it, and it turns out that he had disconnected every single drain line except the toilets from the septic to dump out in the backyard. So the showers, the dishwasher, the kitchen sink, which is all illegal. You can't dump those outside. So we hooked it back up to the septic, and we had 4 people living there in a 5-bedroom house, and the septic immediately exploded. We had to drain it every week. And so we sued him for non-disclosure of that gray water system, saying, hey, you didn't disclose this. He couldn't say he didn't know, because he clearly did, because he disclosed the washing machine. Because even though the 2 bedrooms were not permitted, he sold it as a 5-bedroom functioning house. And as you know, occupancy is 2 per room plus 1. And so people, I had 4, didn't work. So we went after him for the failure to disclose that he'd disconnected everything, and we were successful in that. But it's, again, you got to have some kind of evidence. And I was fortunate that during his deposition, he mentioned it, and that's where we got him.
Yeah. Whenever a client asks me, should I disclose? I say, I don't even need to hear the rest of it. You have to. It's the best thing that you can possibly do. In fact, what we do, and I've been told a lot of agents don't do this, but we actually do disclosures ahead of time. And then I do my disclosures ahead of time. And we actually pre-inspect too. So depending on if it's an estate or not, but we'll inspect the sewer line, inspect the termite. So we're giving people so much information out of the gate that it's hard to have any trouble after that.
It is. The issue that comes in difficult for people is repairs. So I had a roof leak, I repaired it, but it hasn't rained since then. So do I disclose it or not? People will generally say, no, I fixed it. I think you're better off disclosing that, hey, I had this roof leak, I fixed it, I don't know if it works or not.
Right.
Because otherwise you say, well, they painted over it, they knew it was still leaking, and now I've got concealment, I've got fraud. So if there's, when in doubt, like you say, just absolutely disclose it. Because how much is it really going to make a difference? They're going to go, oh, because they will hear you fixed it, right? Or at least keep an eye on it. So I think, yes, you're absolutely right.
So what you're saying is actually the way that I think too. It's like we did it with a licensed guy, or even if it's with a handyman, and they're in no issue sense. But sometimes the clients send over the disclosures because we have a transaction coordinator, and he says, you're going to need to look at this, and because we never send anything that's fluid where they have to fill in stuff without me looking at it first, and it says this happened, and it's totally fixed. kind of like there's never going to be a problem again. I'm thinking like, no, you can't.
Guaranteed.
No, 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 no. You need to just tell the facts and stop acting like a contractor because you just don't know. But well, I want to let them know this. I said, to the best of your knowledge, it's fixed. It's
We have
they
not
need
had, yeah, we
they
have
need
not had
to,
any problems since we did this.
right,
Judge,
right.
judge yourself.
Yeah, the craziest one I ever went through, this one's not that crazy, but it happened to be a celebrity client, and we're selling a property and going through disclosures and say, just disclose everything, everything, everything. Great. Turns out we do that, and then we close, and then we come to find out, I get a call from a big shot attorney, probably some guy like you,
Right.
he says to me, basically there was a non-disclosure. It turns out this property that's right outside their backyard. It looks like their backyard. It actually isn't. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And so we just did. I didn't know. So it turns out that I call up the seller, and the seller says, "Yeah, they didn't tell us when we bought it." And I'm going like, what, you knew that section right there wasn't yours? Because it looked like there's no way the neighbor's going to ever use it. So why didn't you disclose it? Well, they didn't tell us. And I said, okay, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got a big problem. And all you had to do was tell them, I told you that. And so this is where I thought it was so excellent. The seller, the husband, big burly guy, says, Scott, I need you to not worry about this. You're never going to receive a call on this again. I'm so sorry about that. And I went like, wow. I mean, stand up, dude. So he really thought he hadn't done anything right. But you know what he did? He went and fixed it.
Yeah.
He said, what's it worth? I'm going to take care of it. And so I thought that most people want to fight and make excuses. And I thought, well, he told me, you don't have to think about this again. You will never be called again. And I knew I wasn't, and it never happened again.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good client.
Yeah. Yeah. It started off as a hell and it turned out swell.
Yeah. Give me his name.
Yeah. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut because there's some people in this particular deal. There's some people you might know, but most of the people I know, you'll have no clue who they are.
Yeah.
So tell us another real estate health story.
Oh boy, there's so many. Where do you want me to start? I've had a couple square footage cases.
Mm-hmm.
One which was interesting in that they marketed it as a 9,200 square foot house that they had built.
Mm-hmm.
And then they sold it as a 9,200 square foot house. And then they had construction issues when we bought it as the second buyer. And we got to looking at the plans for the house were only for 8,400 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So we said, well, how'd you get 9,200 out of 8,400 foot plans? And so we spent a lot of time going around with that. Trying to
Garage?
no,
Basement?
no. It turns out it was 9,200 square feet. They just built it wrong, and they had the extra square foot. And it's like, how did that happen? Because it was, their depositions were really fun because at the time, I mean, we were still believing that it was, but this is where the investigation and the litigation goes on. I mean, I had architects, cost estimators, and I got a real estate guy out there, and we actually went through and measured it. And he says, yeah, it matched. It's the square footage is there. He says, I just don't know from the plans where it came from. And then I think what happened is they've done some stuff over a garage, like there was supposed to be attic space, and they converted it into usable space.
Sure.
Stuff like that. And so there were a couple areas like that looked a little odd in the actual walking through it, but not so odd that you go, oh, this was clearly what they did, right? So in that case, investigation, got us to where, we had an answer that it wasn't necessarily what we started out pursuing, is just one of the many elements of what we were pursuing that initially it looks like you've really got something. But when you dig into it a little bit, it's maybe not quite what you thought. And that was fine. I mean, if that's what it is, that's what it is. Right. And so that was an interesting one. And then I just resolved.
Before you go on, though, let me just say, what's interesting regarding square footage is I didn't know this a few years ago, but there was an issue with square footage. And I called up a couple of our appraisers. And I said, so why on earth, like called Glenn Kangas or one of these guys, said, why on earth would this guy say this and get this guy measured it this way? He goes, because one of them measured on the inside, one of them measured on the outside. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I didn't realize they could measure differently. And so the thing that we do to hedge this or head off is that we always put, if we put assessor shows as this, seller
Yeah.
knows it to be this, buyer to verify. And then what we do is we do 3D imaging. So the 3D imaging goes and captures all of it. So it really helps us avoid that particular issue. And then, of course, I'm surprised on that purchase that the appraiser, I mean, was it the appraiser that found it different, or after they purchased it, they realized it was different?
Well, when they marketed through Discovery, we got the plans because we were looking at the construction issue. So we got
Okay.
the plans for the house. And then we realized, wait a minute, well, how did this happen? So
Mm-hmm.
that was the other thing that you were talking about with
Mm-hmm.
disclosure on the square footage issues is not every appraiser or realtor evaluates square footage the same. I just
Yep.
completed one where they had like a yoga studio, a 300 square foot yoga studio that they counted in the livable space, and the balconies, the open air balconies in livable space, which is
Mm-hmm.
like, that's a no-no.
Yep.
And once you get around 7%, there's case law on it that 7% is kind of the trigger point for whether square footage makes a difference or not.
Oh, I
And
didn't know
there's case law specifically says 7% in that case, right? So it could be more, it could be less. It depends what it is. You look at the specifics of the house, but basically I look at that target and say, okay, how close or above am I? And in this case, it was a 2,800 square foot actual versus 3,500 represented, or 3,400. And the client who purchased the house said, look, our search, and this was key to our case, is our search parameter said 3,000 feet or more. So if
Mm-hmm.
they had entered this correctly, we would have never been in this house. And obviously, reliance is a huge issue on these cases. And so once I had that testimony that, hey, this would not have even hit our radar had we known, that's an easy demarcation point for me. Where if some people would waffle and say, well, I might have still bought it because I like the location or this, I like the brickwork or whatever. This was an easy, nope, would have never hit our radar type of issue. And the realtor at the end she sent some discovery responses that just shocked me crazy. Say, no, I'm allowed to do that. I can include anything that basically you can walk on as square footage, livable square footage. And it's like, yeah, no, you really can't. And that's why you're paying us.
Nah, you can't.
You
I
can't.
think, what about if a garage is converted without permits? So you have, let's say, an extra 400 feet.
Uh-huh.
So you go from 1,700 per assessor. You add the four because it's converted beautifully, but without permits. In our experience, what we would do is we could market it with the full square footage, but we disclose assessor shows it this way. We're including it this way, and this is and it so breaks down in the agent notes how it's broken down. Is
Yeah,
that doable, or is that workable, or am I messing up?
that works for me. If you market it as 3,000 square footage and then you say 3,000 square footage includes, 600 square foot of non-permitted garage livable
Right.
space, I think you're probably okay with that. As
We
long as
also we
like,
also put it in the disclosures too. So it says it in the agent notes. It
mhm.
also says it in the disclosures that this is what the assessor, this is how we do it. These are because there's times when people are looking for a house and they wouldn't look in that neighborhood. And so if we showed it at 1,700 feet, they might not have looked at it, but then they see it, they fall in love with it. And so they're going to get it converted with permits. And so it turns out to be a real win-win. So it can benefit them that we did it this way too. The key to me is just like 100% disclosure. This is exactly how it breaks down.
Absolutely. You roll that out there and you say
Mm-hmm.
it, three different times. It's a very hard burden to overcome.
Right.
Their defense was, well, it's disclosed later that it's a yoga studio. Well, that doesn't cut it. I mean, you still
Mm-hmm.
numbers still don't match. And we also had text between her and the realtors where she said, or her and her client, excuse me, where she said some things that's like the numbers just didn't match. So made it a little
Right.
easier for us. But yeah, you need to be on top of that and disclose. As far as I'm concerned, as long as you disclose, hey, this area is not permitted. I've included it or not included, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe what you do is 1,700 permitted plus 600 non-permitted
Right.
available space, something like that. It's pretty hard to overcome that kind of stuff. As a buyer, I would look at that and say, okay, that's fine. I like the house. I like everything about it. Get it permitted before I buy it, before I close.
Well,
So
the other way to do it is what we do is when we price out the house, we
yeah,
price it out at the assessor square footage. So if you have a non-permitted garage, we're not even working down to the price. That's a huge bonus to us. So that way we know that when the appraiser comes in, he knows what's going on or she knows what's going on already. And we're
Yeah.
saying, look, we know it doesn't have the same value. It has a value, but a fraction of the value per foot.
Yes.
So that's what
Yeah.
we do.
No, and then, you know, for the money on some of these houses, that much square footage isn't going to make overall that much difference as compared to the headaches it's going to cause you down the road. If
Mm-hmm.
somebody later gets upset and says, you didn't tell me this, and you get
Mm-hmm.
a letter from someone like me saying, hey, you've got a real problem here, because that headache's going to be much bigger than a couple thousand or ten or $15,000 on a sale price.
Absolutely.
Not worth it.
Absolutely. Well, what else you got? That's so far. So far, I mean, you're speaking my language. I love it.
Well, one of the things that's also interesting too is the mediation versus arbitration. This is not so much a story as kind of a philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm sure you know, all the car forms have the language in there about mediation and arbitration provisions that you have to mediate before you arbitrate or go
Right.
to court. And it's interesting too that the realtors so often when these things come up, as I'm sure you know, the realtors almost always and brokers get involved, whether they want to be or not. And
Yes.
it's surprising to me how many of them just flat out refuse to mediate, to participate in the mediation. I think it's a huge mistake for the realtors and the brokers not to participate, even if they're not putting any money, because it's at least an opportunity for them to hear what potential exposure they have, what are the
Mm-hmm.
claims, what are the problems, so they can start formulating a response before there's any litigation or
Right.
anybody pointing fingers at them.
Or maybe they can resolve it, like you said earlier. Maybe there's an equitable way, a reasonable way to resolve it and avoid all the hell that you're going to go through.
Exactly, because the one I talked about a little bit ago with the square footage and the yoga studio, we ended up filing a lawsuit, compelled arbitration with the seller, but the realtor and the broker refused to participate. So I had half my case in court and half of it in arbitration. And so ultimately, we stayed the arbitration so we could push forward with the lawsuit, and then they were cross complained, and then we got it into mediation, and that's how we finally got it done. But it can be very complicated very quickly in those terms. And actually, in all my contracts, my construction contracts now for the last 15 years, I basically put that language in my construction contracts that, hey, you have to mediate, and if you don't, you don't get attorney's fees. And you have to mediate and talk with us before any litigation and attorney's fees start
Oh, I
racking.
love it.
Now, sometimes you can't, or it's not productive because you simply don't know enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like for the example, the one with the floor plans, I didn't know that I had a case there until I got into the lawsuit, started looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be willing to go in on what information you have with the
Right.
mediation and be willing to hopefully resolve it without knowing everything. But then the other side's kind of the same way too. So, but it still pays to sit down and talk and try and get something done informally, at least, that everyone can agree on. And whether everybody's
Mm-hmm.
happy with it or not, you know, depends. But it's so much more efficient and cost effective and puts the problem behind everybody that people that say they won't mediate, I don't understand the thinking there at all.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, when I look at the situations that I've been in, even a recent situation where it could have, I mean, it really could have been a hellacious situation and drawn on for years. Says, you guys, can we just stop for a second before we start pulling out our guns, start shooting? Can we just sit down and really just talk about this? And once you start talking it out, it's all of a sudden it's like, well, I just feel this and this because my dad did this and this. I'm going, so what are you saying that you need? Because you're acting like you're not going to get out. What's going on? Well, I just instead of getting out on Saturday, I want to get on Monday. I'm going like, that's not
That's your
okay.
problem. Fine.
Yeah. So I called all the attorneys and said, hey, we talked this out, and guys, holster those guns. He just wants 2 more days. We need to just talk. This is not a bad guy. He can be abrasive, and he's a hurt, and he doesn't communicate well. So, but at the end of it, we found out what he wanted. Deal closes. Everyone's happy. I'm going like, oh, that to me was a mediation.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and actually, I've got one active today that I was talking to the guy. I said, look, we just used to get everybody in a room and sit down. It's like a 3-party deal, lease agreement that's kind of going south. I
Mm-hmm.
got involved probably a little later than I should have. The client called me too late, and it's kind of like, okay, but why can't we just get in a room and sit down and everybody, I want some, A wants something from B wants something from C wants something from A. So if we just kind of everybody shuffle one
Right.
hand to the left, we're good. And but it's not quite that easy. But generally speaking, that's everybody wants this to happen. But it's like, I got we're filing a lawsuit tomorrow email today. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, come on, you grow up.
Yeah.
So it's always that kind of, not always. It's rare is the case in which everybody wants the same goal,
Right.
right? Sometimes somebody wants money, the other side doesn't want to pay it. That one, they kind of want the same, but they're going about it with, shields and knives out,
Mm-hmm.
poking each other a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I do have one case that's active that everybody wants the same thing. And it's kind of nice that, you know, basically the client, who's deceased now, I'm handling it for this date, built a very large retaining wall without any permission, and the city's working with us on getting it repaired without.
That's a rough one.
Well, after 12 years of litigation with the lady who died, then yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so they're happy to have somebody involved, but everybody wants it done. So I really can't talk more about that one. It's an extremely interesting case. Off the record, I could probably tell you some more details, and you'll just shake your head. But that
Well,
case,
we can revisit this. We can make this an annual thing.
we
You and I get together.
Sure. I'd hope to see you more than annually, but if that's all of you can stand, I guess that's okay too.
No, I'm talking about the
We do
real
that.
estate. I'm talking about the podcast itself.
Oh,
By the
okay.
way, I do need to tell you that the way that thing, the artwork goes up in the back, it looks like you have a helmet.
Yeah, I noticed that. That as I said, that's why I was telling Nico was saying that. I'm like, man, I hope that thing doesn't end up square up on my head. Uh,
Yes.
that's why I sit like this, so people don't have to look,
Too late.
contemplate it. I'm sitting here looking at my picture, going, "Oh man, did I sit up
Yeah.
higher? Maybe I should have sat up more the whole time." And like I was more interested in what you had to say, but honestly, I wasn't, so I sat back.
We're not doing this again, though. I'm sorry. It was too good
Oh,
the first time. We're going to just have to get past you and your helmet.
we
So,
will.
if you don't mind, that was awesome, by the way. But I don't know is there any type of charity or cause that you'd like to shine some light on? Because what we like to do is talk about the real estate hell and the challenges, but also like to hear more about your heart and things that matter to you. And then we like to post it and give it to you to post so that we can shine light on something
Sure.
that matters to you.
There's actually two charities
Nope,
that
only get one. Only get one.
I only get one.
No,
Okay.
you can do two. I'm
Well,
kidding.
that one
Go.
is my kid's flight fund. But anyway, uh, no, the one that the one local and one national international is kind of how I looked at it. So I'm covering all
Uh-huh.
my bases. The first one is called Door of Hope, and it's a
Uh-huh.
Pasadena local charity. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, what it does is it helps families who are on the homeless or on the verge of homelessness get housing. Mainly, it's women with children that have no man supporting them or with them working with them, but it's full families too, and they provide
Mm-hmm.
temporary housing in Pasadena. And they it's a Christian nonprofit based in Pasadena. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
then they provide homeless shelter that puts a family together in a private unit. So
Oh,
they
nice.
have some houses that they have, and then other housing also for families. And we've donated monetarily for them, but also certain donations that can handle perhaps some bikes or something like that for the kids because
Mm-hmm.
they're having kids come and go. So
Right.
that's one. That's a local one that we like. Nationally and internationally, the one that we support, we support the LA Mission too, but basically Samaritan's Purse is the Franklin Graham charity
Mm-hmm.
that does both national and international charity work.
Okay.
And so that's one that we also support. So we like to support the local because you see the impact here and you hear the stories here,
That's
but
great.
also realize that there's issues on a national scale that we try to help the Samaritan's Purse with that as well.
Would you mind telling just a little bit more about Samaritan's First?
Samaritan's Purse. So
Purse.
purse, yes,
Okay, that's one. Glad I
Love it.
asked.
Samaritan's Purse.
Okay.
Uh, Samaritan's Purse is basically, it's a non-denominational, and I'm reading from their website here, so I make sure I get it right.
That's fine.
Non-denominational evangelical Christian organization providing spiritual and physical aid to hurting people in the world since 1970. So war, poverty, natural disasters, disease,
Mm-hmm.
famine. Basically, 10% of what they take in goes to overhead. Everything else is distributed from the organization. So
That's
kind of like Salvation Army, they are not top heavy in administration. You hear a lot of these foundations that they take in $12 million, of which 11.9 is used on staff salaries. That these are neither of these organizations are run that way.
mm-hmm.
So it's something that I kind of look at that when I look at what charities that we support.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of volunteer, but Samaritan's Purse, natural disasters has often been one of the first responders, even concurrent or in advance of like American Red Cross, hurricane damage, hurricane
Mm-hmm.
storms, tornadoes through the Midwest. They're there. Any kind of natural disasters, they're following up on and providing food, lodging, basic necessities that people need, on a temporary basis to get people back on their feet.
I love it. That's great. And I'm glad I asked you because otherwise the title would be wrong.
Well,
Um,
the story of the Good Samaritan, that's what it's from. So the Samaritan's purse, he pulled the money out of his purse. And so, yes, so it's, if you Google Samaritan's Purse, you
mhm.
will get it.
I think that's great. And thank you for sharing that.